From New York, this is Democracy Now!
We are protesting the Citizenship Amendment Bill, which is dividing people, which is taking advantage in the name of religion, and this is what we do not want. India is a secular country, and let it remain secular.
Protests erupt across India against a new anti-Muslim law that gives immigrants from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan a path to citizenship unless they're Muslim. Police have responded with violence, leaving at least 6 people dead. We'll get an on-the-ground update from New Delhi from Neha Dixit, an independent reporter who just received the 2019 International Press Freedom Award from the Committee to Protect Journalists. Then Aung San Suu Kyi, the Nobel Peace Laureate, who spent over a decade fighting the Burmese military, is now at The Hague defending it against allegations of genocide against Rohingya Muslims.
Regrettably, the Gambia has placed before the court an incomplete and misleading factual picture of the situation in Rakhine State in Myanmar. Yet, it is of the utmost importance that the court assess the situation obtaining on the ground in Rakhine dispassionately and accurately.
Then we look at the historic Democratic Presidential Forum on Public Education that drew 7 candidates to lay out their positions on everything from quality pre-K to affordable college.
All across America, in so-called red states, Oklahoma, West Virginia, Kentucky, we have seen teachers standing up, fighting not only for their rights as workers, but equally important for their kids and decent funding so their kids could get the education they deserve.
We'll play highlights and get response from education activists across the country. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The House of Representatives slated to vote tomorrow on 2 articles of impeachment against President Trump, abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Today, a number of Democratic lawmakers from conservative-leaning districts announced they would vote for impeachment, all but guaranteeing Trump will become the 3rd president in U.S. history to be impeached. On Monday, the House Judiciary Committee released a 658-page report arguing Trump, quote, betrayed the nation by abusing his high office, unquote. There are more than 500 pro-impeachment rallies planned for tonight, with activists expected to take to the streets in every U.S. state. If the Democrat-controlled House votes to impeach, then the impeachment trial will play out in the Republican-controlled Senate. On Monday, Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer called on the Senate Majority Leader, Republican Mitch McConnell, to demand testimony from 4 current and former White House aides during the impeachment trial.
If Leader McConnell doesn't hold a full and fair trial, the American people will rightly ask, what are you, Leader McConnell, and what is President Trump hiding?
Meanwhile, Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, told the New York Times Monday he repeatedly briefed President Trump about how Giuliani believed United States Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, was impeding investigations that could politically benefit Trump. The president then connected Giuliani with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and Yovanovitch was then ousted after a smear campaign engineered by Giuliani. The impeachment inquiry centers on how President Trump withheld military aid from Ukraine in order to pressure the Ukrainians to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden, ahead of the 2020 election. The House Rules Committee is slated to hold a hearing today to set parameters for Wednesday's impeachment floor debate and votes. You can go to democracynow.org for the full ruling hearing today. Democratic presidential candidates are vowing to boycott Thursday's primary debate if a labor dispute between a food workers union and the company Sodexo is not resolved. The union, Unite Here Local 11, says Sodexo does not provide decent yearly wage increases, affordable health care, or year-round work, and has vowed to stage a picket line during Thursday's televised debate if an agreement is not reached. The union has been in negotiations with the food service company since March. All all 7 candidates slated to take the stage during Thursday's debate have vowed not to cross the picket line. In more debate news, New Jersey Senator Cory Booker and 8 other Democratic presidential candidates have signed a letter to DNC Chair Tom Perez, urging the DNC to change its qualification criteria for upcoming debates in January and February. The effort to change the criteria comes after Booker and Julian Castro, 2 of the most prominent candidates of color, did not make the threshold for Thursday's debate in Los Angeles. Of the 7 candidates who did qualify for Thursday's debate, only 1 candidate, Andrew Yang, is a person of color. Republican South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham says President Trump may announce a drawdown of U.S. troops in Afghanistan before the year's end. Graham was speaking from the Afghan capital, Kabul, Monday. He said Trump may reduce the number of troops from 12,000 to 8,600. Graham's visit to Afghanistan and his announcement comes a week after the Washington Post published an extraordinary trove of secret U.S. documents known as the Afghanistan Papers, revealing how U.S. officials repeatedly lied about the U.S. war in Afghanistan and hid evidence the war had become unwinnable. In India, protests against the controversial Citizenship Amendment bill have spread to over a dozen cities, with the Indian government deploying troops, imposing curfews, shutting down internet access in an effort to stifle the growing protests. Many have denounced the citizenship bill as a major step toward the official marginalization of India's 200 million Muslims. It provides a path to citizenship for immigrants from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, unless they are Muslim. Security forces have clashed with students and shot dead protesters. This is India's opposition Congress leader Priyanka Gandhi.
The government has attacked students by entering universities, so we'll fight for the Constitution. We've said it time and again that we will fight against the government.
We'll go to New Delhi to hear more about the protests in India after headlines. Pakistan's former president and military ruler Pervez Musharraf has been sentenced to death in absentia for high treason. The former leader seized power in a military coup in 1999 and ruled Pakistan as president till 2008. He's now living in self-imposed exile in Dubai. The high treason conviction stems from Musharraf's decision to declare emergency rule while in power in violation of the Constitution. Today's ruling marks the first time in Pakistan's history an army chief has been convicted of treason. In China, the state-run media outlet CCTV canceled the broadcast between the England Arsenal and Manchester City after the star player of the Arsenal, Mesut Ozil, criticized the Chinese government's violent abuse of Uyghur Muslims. On Friday, the famed soccer player Ozil, who's Turkish, German, and Muslim, called the Uyghurs, quote, warriors who resist persecution. Chinese authorities have been accused of systematically separating Muslim children from their families in the far western region of Xinjiang. An estimated 1 million people from the Uyghur community are being imprisoned in camps without trial. Boeing is temporarily suspending production of the troubled 737 MAX passenger jet after the airplane was grounded worldwide following 2 crashes in Ethiopia and Indonesia that killed all 346 people on board. Last week, a former Boeing manager testified to the House Transportation Committee. He tried to warn Boeing executives about safety concerns before both deadly crashes, but his warnings were ignored. To see our full interview with consumer advocate Ralph Nader on the 737 MAX passenger jet, go to DemocracyNow.org. The Nader family has sued over the death of his grandniece, Samia Stumo, who died on Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. A new audit has revealed how the Sackler family withdrew more than $10 billion from their company, Purdue Pharma, as scrutiny mounted over Purdue Pharma's role in the opioid epidemic. The Sacklers distributed the money among trusts and overseas holding companies, raising even more questions about how much money the family actually has and how much the Sacklers should pay to compensate victims of the United States opioid crisis. Local and state governments have brought thousands thousands of lawsuits against Purdue Pharma. Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, said, quote, "The fact that the Sackler family removed more than $10 billion when Purdue's OxyContin was directly causing countless addictions, hundreds of thousands of deaths, and tearing apart millions of families is further reason that we must see detailed financial records showing how much the Sacklers profited from the nation's deadly opioid epidemic," she said. A new study reveals how 91 of the Fortune 500 companies effectively paid no federal taxes in 2018. The study by the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy shows how Amazon, Starbucks, Chevron, Duke Energy, Halliburton, and others paid an effective federal tax rate of 0% or less. In San Francisco, California, dozens of activists, including many disabled protesters, blocked roads and shut down the PG&E headquarters for hours Monday, demanding the massive utility company stop its chronic power outages and invest money to ensure communities of color and disabled people are guaranteed stable electricity. This is one of the protesters.
People rely on electricity to live, and meanwhile, PG&E hasn't been maintaining their power lines, and they're giving money to shareholders. They're not investing their money in actually making it safe. And frankly, utilities should not be privately owned and for profit. They should be serving people.
In October, nearly 1 million PG&E customers had their electricity shut off as wildfires blazed across Los Angeles and Northern California. The unprecedented blackouts followed last year's devastating Camp Fire, which killed 85 people, the deadliest blaze in California history. Investigators found poorly maintained PG&E transmission lines sparked that fire. In North Carolina, a police officer who slammed an 11-year-old middle school student to the ground twice has been fired. The assault at Vance County Middle School was caught on surveillance tape, which shows the school resource officer and a small boy walking next to him down the hallway when the officer picks the boy up and throws him to the ground. The officer then picks the boy up again and slams him to the ground again. The officer, who's not been publicly named, was first placed on paid leave and was then fired as the video went viral. And here in New York, thousands of undocumented people waited in lines at DMVs on Monday to apply for a driver's license, marking a major victory for immigrant rights. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo signed the Green Light Law in June, which allows people to apply for a driver's license using alternative forms of identification instead of providing a Social Security number. Meanwhile, in the neighboring state of New Jersey, legislators also passed a bill Monday to allow undocumented people to apply for driver's licenses following emotional testimonies at the New Jersey State Assembly last week. Among those to testify was a 9-year-old New Jersey resident named David.
We need these licenses because there's cold weather, snow, and then when the snow gets higher, we're not going to be able to walk. It's called this community a great community when we need licenses. Licenses can help our children go to school and learn, because my parents don't have a license, and that's why I barely go to school, and I came here today because I support the licenses.
Today, as New Jersey lawmakers approve the bill to grant undocumented people driver's licenses, supporters erupted in cheers and chants of "Si se pudo," yes, we could. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy has already said he will sign the legislation into law. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today's show in India, where a wave of protests continues across country in opposition to a new anti-Muslim citizenship law. Many see the so-called Citizenship Amendment Bill as a major step toward the official marginalization of India's 200 million Muslims because it provides a path to citizenship for immigrants from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, unless they're Muslim.
We are protesting the Citizenship Amendment Bill, which is dividing people, which is taking advantage in the name of religion, and this is what we do not want. India is a secular country, and let it remain secular.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi has responded to the demonstrations in more than a dozen cities by deploying troops, enacting a curfew, and shutting down the internet. Police have also violently confronted protesters, leaving at least 6 dead, including 4 people shot by police in the state of Assam. Student protesters at Jamia Millia Islamia University in New Delhi clashed with police over the weekend. In one video that's gone viral, police officers can be seen beating a male student as a group of female friends try to protect him. The police continue to beat the young man with their wooden batons despite the women's pleas. One of the female students who hurled her body in front of the police batons, 22-year-old Ladida Farzana, later told reporters she's fighting for her very existence in India and encouraged others to do the same.
It's a matter of existence. If actually it happened first with the Kashmir issue. At that time, we kept quiet. We kept in the peace, many of them. Then came the Babri verdict, and we lost our faith over the judiciary in that verdict. Later on, when it came to the CAA, we are certain that next they will be targeting the whole India. If you see any injustice in the society, don't think that you are a woman who someone will be telling like that, or someone will be telling that. Don't think of that. Just get out, raise your voice. Men will be making you sit inside, slow down your voice, because women are always told and they were always nurtured by telling that make your voice very low, keep respect men. But no, raise your voice. Wherever you wanted to raise the voice, raise your voice.
Despite the police violence, protests against the citizenship bill are continuing. They come amidst a broader crackdown on India's Muslims by Modi's government. In the Muslim-majority region Kashmir, access to internet has been shut down more than 4 months. And Modi has already enforced a citizenship test in the state of Assam, which borders Burma and Bangladesh, requiring 33 million residents to provide evidence they or their ancestors lived in India before 1971. More than 2 million people, many of them Muslim, failed to pass the test and are now at risk of being held in mass detention camps. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Modi himself has been accused of sanctioning the massacre of more than 2,000 Muslims in the state of Gujarat in 2002 when he was chief minister there. For that massacre, he was banned from the United States for years. Well, for more, we go to New Delhi, India, where we're joined by Neha Dixit. She is an independent journalist who's been covering the protests against the new citizenship bill. Her investigative reporting focuses on politics, gender, and social justice. Last month, she received the 2019 International Press Freedom Award from the Committee to Protect Journalists. Neha, we welcome you to Democracy Now! Thank you so much for joining us from New Delhi. Tell us what's happening there.
Thank you so much, Amy. Amy, the things are quite disturbing and bad at the same time. On 9th December, the Home Minister of this country, Amit Shah, introduced the bill in the Parliament, in the lower house of the Parliament, and on December 11th, 2 days later, the law was passed in the upper house, which is the Rajya Sabha. So the Citizenship Amendment Act right now excludes, like you said, excludes Muslims particularly, and 6 other communities, immigrants from 6 communities have been allowed citizenship under this act. No explanation has been given why these 6 communities have been allowed and why Muslims have been excluded. And this goes completely against the tenets of the kind of plurality and diversity that exists in India and a number of us grew up with. So it completely goes, it's unconstitutional and illegal. And even though Amit Shah, the Home Minister of the country, said in the Parliament that it has the endorsement of 130 crore people of India, the protests that have broken out in various parts in the country, including Jamia Millia Islamia, IIT Kharagpur, IIT Bombay, Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Bombay, in Guwahati, in Tamil Nadu. There are protests all over the country right now. 24 students from 24 universities in India are out there protesting against this act. So that the government has not been kind to the criticism or the debate or the dissent that has come up regarding this act. And most of the protesters have been met with police violence. There is police brutality all over. Yesterday, And day before, there have been various incidents in Jamia Millia Islamia University. Yesterday, students protesting at IIM Ahmedabad were also detained. The same goes in West Bengal. The same similar thing happened in Tamil Nadu. So I think the country is burning right now, and nobody is ready to accept this kind of sectarian law that the government has passed with the complete Islamophobic agenda in mind. I also want to say that at this point, it's important to recall that the current political party in power, Bharatiya Janata Party, they had stated this in their manifesto in the 2014 general elections, and this time in May 2019 general elections, that this is what they're going to pass. And because they have always had the agenda of creating India into a Hindu country, the Hindu Rashtra, this is a step forward in that direction and breaking the secularism that we all grew up with in this country.
The New York Times headline today on the front page, Neha, is India erupts in protests as Modi presses vision for Hindu nation. So explain the different actions he's been involved with, going back to the Gujarat massacre of 2002, for which he was banned from the United States for years.
Absolutely. Modi, first of all, Narendra Modi has been a member of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which is the parent body, RSS, which is the parent body of the current political party in power in BJP. RSS, one of the main tenets of RSS is Hindutva, which is to make India into a Hindu country. So they've always been Islamophobic. Modi, as the chief minister in Gujarat in 2002, he was the chief minister when several people were massacred. All of them Muslims, 2,000 people were killed in various capacities. There was no investigation. People who were involved in it had direct involvement with the political party in power at that time, which was again BJP. And there were lots of other affiliated organizations with RSS who were involved in it. There have been several documentations to prove that. Moving from his chief ministership from Gujarat to his journey as the prime minister, he's constantly been saying things which have been Islamophobic in nature. In 2014 general elections, just before his first term as the prime minister, they had promised in their agenda that they are going to stop the pink revolution. And the pink revolution was a direct reference to the Muslim community that is involved in, that owns a number of slaughterhouses in India. And that's when they started this whole, and once they came into power in 2014, they started this entire narrative about Muslims consuming beef. And in the last 6 years, since 2014 to almost now, we have seen number of lynchings of people specifically from the Muslim community, and some of them Dalits, who are also in the lower rung of the Hindu caste order. And we've seen number of those lynchings. We have seen police in Uttar Pradesh, again under the chief minister of Yogi Adityanath, who is a Hindu Islamophobic monk, again from BJP. We've seen almost 5,000 police shootouts in the last 2 years, where 72 people have been killed, all of them again Muslims, and really from a very socio-economically working class marginalized background. So this agenda has been carried forward. And even now, yesterday, while Prime Minister Modi is campaigning in a state called Jharkhand, which is poll-bound, he has said, responding to the protests, he has said that you can make out from the kind of attire the people are protesting that who they are, and which is a direct reference to the attire that the Muslim community wears. And that is, again, in a poll-bound state, he is again trying to create this kind of communal divide between people. So I would like to place this on record that while globally we are talking about several autocrats, the whole idea of the global Islamophobic trend that is growing on, hasn't been enough critique of Narendra Modi to be seen in that light, particularly because he's been making all these foreign trips. He was recently in United States also with the Howdy Modi campaign. I think this agenda has constantly been there. They've also been several investigative reports. I have also done one where the RSS, the Hindu body behind BJP, have been trafficking several children from Northeast India and taking them to Hindu seminaries in other parts of India to indoctrinate them in the Hindutva ideology, and they are told how Muslims are the invaders, Christians are the invaders, and how to fight them, and how they are rapists. So this kind of narrative has been propagated in the remotest corners, and Narendra Modi has been at the helm of these affairs.
Can you describe just yesterday, I mean, as we tried to reach you yesterday through the day, you were in the streets for hours. We just described what happened at JMI University, the level of the police violence and the number of deaths that has resulted from that violence.
Yes, exactly. This is the first time actually that that Jamia Millia Islamia is a central university. So it is not just for Muslims. Many professionals in various departments have actually attended this university across religions. So first of all, the government itself is trying to put it out as a university for Muslims, which it is not. What happened in the last 3 days is that on Friday, several students were out there just carrying a peaceful march in protest against the Citizenship Amendment Act. The police, within an hour of that march, targeted them with water cannons. The water cannons were on standby. There was tear gas shelling. There were stones hurled at the students. There is enough documentation for that. And then there were shoes. So the students went back, and the next day when they came out again, the police dealt with them with greater brutality that is unheard of in Indian history. Police entered the campus. They were inside the library. They broke the window pane. Students were trying to hide away from the police in the reading halls of the main library of the Jamia Millia Islamia University. The police tried to break the window panes, and through that they fired tear gas shells. And according to the United Nations guidelines, you can't fire tear gas in confined spaces. So several people were injured in that. People couldn't breathe, they couldn't escape. Several students had locked themselves inside washrooms, but the police entered inside. The first thing they did, and this is accounts from eyewitnesses that I gathered yesterday, that the first thing that the police did was to break the CCTV cameras in these spaces, and then they charged with the students with batons. They slapped several of them, and apart from that, there's confirmed news that 2 people, at least from Jamia, have been shot with bullets. So this is not tear gas shells, or these are not rubber bullets, but these are actual fire. They were actually fired at. One of the students, his reports has come out, and it has been confirmed that there were bullet injuries. Now, why were the students who were just trying to hide away from the police were beaten up in this manner? The unfortunate part is that the next day the students had to appear for exams. So a lot of students were just in the reading halls preparing for their examination the next day. And as a result, the university has declared a vacation for these students. Now, suddenly, most of the students are from outside. They are from Kashmir, which we've heard of, where people can't reach their parents, and suddenly the university has shut down, and the students have been advised to evacuate the university. So several students are stranded. Several women students in the hostel in the campus are stranded, and they are terrified. So this has been a general situation. Lots of people are scared. They're in panic, and this is completely unheard of, and there has been no action. And the proctor of the Jamia Millia Islamia University went on record to say that the police requires permission to enter the campus, but no permission was taken, and the police just barged in. So the atmosphere has been tense since then, and we have not heard anything positive or constructive from anybody from the administration or the government.
Neha Dixit, Bollywood and cricket stars play a huge role in India in shaping public opinion, yet they have been largely silent here. Can you explain why?
If I put it simply, I think it is very important to point out that the reason behind their silence is the corporate political nexus right now in India that is ruling everything. The same corporate groups fund the political parties that are now in power. The same corporate groups own cricket leagues or teams in the cricket in the Indian Premier League. The same corporate groups fund the Bollywood film industry, and which is why this silence has also to do with the kind of commerce involved in this and this huge nexus which is not being broken, and which is why we can't see independent voices. The one or two independent voices that we have seen have been crushed completely because the next time they are not given work any longer. So there is no scope for any freedom of expression or speech right now in the kind of current environment that we are in. So either there is some kind of boycott economically, or there is a lot of shaming and harassment and torture that happens. There have been several reports, bona fide reports, to suggest that the current political party in power has an organized troll army to send all kinds of threats to people who come out and speak up, and there is no action ever taken. We've also lost people. We've seen several threats to somebody like Gauri Lankesh, who spoke up, who was killed, but she was a journalist. But even with Bollywood stars who have come up and spoken up, they have received all kinds of threats. So I think the general atmosphere is such as that the corporate political nexus is not allowing it, and there's a vicious environment full of hate, and people who propagate this kind of hate know that they enjoy impunity and they're backed by the government, and there'll be no action against them.
Now, I want to thank you for being with us. Final question. Would you describe India as a democracy?
As of now, I would say that even though India has a democratically elected leader, we are in a democracy under a dictator. So we are not a democracy. We are only a democracy for the privileged upper caste Hindu in this country, and none of the other communities that have existed in India for so many years.
Well, please stay safe. Neha Dixit, independent journalist based in New Delhi, India. Her investigative reporting focuses on politics, gender, and social justice. She just received the 2019 International Press Freedom Award from the Committee to Protect Journalists, speaking to us from New Delhi. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. As we turn right now to break, we'll be back. Collective. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman as we turn to The Hague, where Burma's de facto leader Aung San Suu Kyi has asked the UN International Court of Justice to drop the genocide case against her country. The Burmese military killed and raped thousands of Rohingya and forced more than 700,000 to flee into neighboring Bangladesh in a brutal army crackdown in 2017. International aid groups say thousands of Rohingya have been murdered. 250,000 have been forced to flee into Bangladesh. But Aung San Suu Kyi, the Nobel Peace Laureate, who spent over a decade fighting against the Burmese military, is now defending it. Last week, she appeared in person at The Hague to dispute the charges and call the allegations of genocide against Rohingya Muslims incomplete and misleading.
Myanmar requests the court to remove the case from its list. In the alternative, to reject the request for the indication of provisional measures submitted by the Gambia. Mr. President, it is vital for Myanmar's present and future that our civilian and military criminal justice systems functions in accordance with the Constitution. Where a country has a military justice system, neutralizing this system by externalizing justice, in effect, surgically removes a critical limb from the body, the limb that helps armed forces to self-correct, to improve, to better perform their functions within the constitutional order.
During the international court hearings, Aung San Suu Kyi repeatedly tried to deny the Burmese military has carried out genocide against the Muslim Rohingya, although she never once used that word, Rohingya, during her speeches. Gambia brought the genocide case to the international court, accusing Burma of trying to, quote, destroy the Rohingya as a group in whole or in part by the use of mass murder, rape, and other forms of sexual violence, end quote. For more, we go to Barcelona, Spain, where we're joined by Reed Brody, counsel and spokesperson for Human Rights Watch, also helping Gambian victims seeking to prosecute their former dictator, Yahya Jammeh. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Reed. Can you talk about the significance of Aung San Suu Kyi, the de facto leader of Burma, saying that the genocide against the Rohingya, others call it the Rohingya, did not take place?
Well, you know, this was a spectacular moment for international justice, with, you know, the eyes of the world, the case live streamed to Myanmar, to the Rohingyas around the world. You had Gambia laying out the case that the government of Myanmar was committing genocide. And Aung San Suu Kyi, the de facto leader, was there listening and participating. Obviously, you know, she went there for domestic political reasons, to show that, you know, she was in solidarity with the military who continue to rule in many ways the country, in solidarity with those majorities in the country who hate and despise the Rohingyas and have mistreated them, not just for the last couple of years, but for many years. But, you know, it's a spectacular fall from grace for a woman who was the Nobel Peace Prize winner, an icon of the human rights movement, now to be sitting there, standing there, forcefully defending her government, a government which, as you said, has displaced over 1 million Rohingyas, that has committed systematic rape and the destruction of villages. And to have this transmitted all over the world, again, I don't think, you know, from an international point of view, this was a disaster for her. I mean, if somebody is accusing you of a crime, of genocide no less, you want to run away from those charges, hide them. By going to The Hague for domestic reasons, she guaranteed that the world would be watching, that the cameras of the world would be focused on these very accusations.
So Aung San Suu Kyi goes to The Hague. The case was brought by Gambia. Explain why Gambia.
Well, it's a fascinating story, actually. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, a 57-member group of Islamic countries, have obviously been concerned about the treatment, the crimes against the Rohingyas, and they created an ad hoc group to look at different legal recourses. And the Attorney General of the Gambia was at a meeting of the OIC in Bangladesh. He went to the border. Now, this is a man, Abu Bakr Tambadou, who I work with very closely on Gambian issues, who had been a prosecutor himself at the Rwanda War Crimes Tribunal, who had prosecuted cases of genocide. And he said, when I went to, and in fact he told the court, when I went to the border, I saw genocide. I smelled the stench of genocide. And so when the Muslim cooperation agencies were looking for what to do, he actually proposed this course and proposed that Gambia would take this case to the International Court of Justice. And it's, you know, within Gambia, there's a lot of discussion. I mean, Gambia is going through, as we've talked on your show, a very painful process of accounting for its own past abuses, of its own dictatorship. And a lot of people in Gambia are, well, why are we, you know, what do we have to do with that? 7,000 kilometers, 5,000 miles away from the Gambia. But I think the Attorney General has made the point that, you know, it's precisely a country like Gambia, a democratic country dealing with its own issues. And that is the kind of solidarity, Amy, that we don't very often see these days. A country, small African country, standing up for the rights of a persecuted minority, you know, 5,000 miles away.
Reed Brody, I want to thank you so much for being with us. Just give us the chronology of what happens next. 2 days of hearings. When does the International Criminal Court decide?
Well, the hearings were on the Gambia's request for the equivalent of an injunction. And the bar is very high. This is a very conservative court made up largely of former government officials. They don't like to interfere in national affairs. The quote that you played from Aung San Suu Kyi played exactly to that. So Gambia is asking for the equivalent of an injunction. We're assuming, given the urgency and given the eyes of the world on this case, that the court will rule on that request for provisional measures within the next month.
We want to thank you so much, Reed Brody, counsel and spokesperson for Human Rights Watch. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, a historic presidential forum on education. Stay with us. A sixth trumpet from monuments to masses. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. Ahead of the last Democratic presidential debate of the year this Thursday in Los Angeles, 7 candidates appeared Saturday at a historic Democratic presidential forum on public education in Pittsburgh, an event organized by public education groups, unions, civil rights groups. Well, for more, we're joined by 3 guests. In Atlanta, Georgia, Karen Blair is director of the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools. In Chicago, G2 Brown is the national director of the Journey for Justice Alliance. And in New York, Carol Burris is executive director of the Network for Public Education Action, who recently authored a report titled Still Asleep at the Wheel, How the Federal Charter Schools Program Results in a Pileup of Fraud and Waste. I spoke with them and asked them about this forum that didn't get very much attention. We began in Atlanta with Karen Blair and asked him how they organized the forum and what he felt was so critical.
Good morning, Amy. It is so good to be with you. I should say that, you know, as the director of the Alliance, we pulled together a number of groups, including the folks who are joining me, the Journey for Justice Alliance, the Network for Public Education, and we all put time and staff and energy into making this forum possible. For us, it is historic because it is one of the first times in recent memory where public education was at the center of the conversation with folks who are looking to be president. The idea for this forum emerged months ago after we worked together to actually introduce the Keep Our Pact Act. And folks had a meeting where we said, given the importance of this issue, we need to figure out how we raise education to the national level and really get folks on the record on the issues that we care about. And so for months, folks have been working, pulling together resources, staff, relationships, and Saturday was phenomenal on a lot of levels because what we had, again, we had parents, we had students, we had educators, we had education professionals, we had school staff, we had higher ed advocates in one room under one big tent, naming the issues we cared about, like investment in public schools, ending the school-to-prison pipeline, ending the privatization and charter movement, deepening our commitment to racial justice and the infrastructure and what we know is required to make learning possible. And so we are happy to have been a part of that and happy to have joined partners in labor, on the community side, parents, students, school staff, in making this event possible.
I wanted to turn back to the moderator, Rahema Ellis, asking Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren about charter schools.
Right now, the majority of children who find themselves in public charter schools are minority children, are black and brown children. Some parents of those black and brown children say, what do I do while I wait for my public school to get up to speed to provide my child with the kind of academic excellence that they deserve? What do you say to those parents who are looking for that public charter school option?
So I've met with many parents and grandparents who've put their children in public charter schools, and I have no doubt about the sincerity of their efforts to educate their children. And they're looking for the best educational opportunity they can find. I believe that. But I believe that it is our responsibility as a nation, and will be my responsibility as President of the United States, to make certain that every public school is an excellent public school.
Yes, that's future-oriented. We've been trying to do that for years. We've been spending billions of dollars in education reform in this country for decades, and we are not there yet in terms of the academic excellence. You know what the nation's report card just came out and said in terms of our students being able to read in 4th and 8th grade?
I'm not proposing cutting funding for children who are currently in charter schools. I believe that for-profit charter schools should be closed, but that's a different issue. I also believe that all charter schools should have to meet exactly the same requirements that all other public schools have to meet.
So that's Massachusetts Senator, presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren. Carol Burris is with us, who was also at the forum on Saturday, executive director of the Network for Public Education Action, who recently released the report, Still Asleep at the Wheel, How the Federal Charter Schools Program Results in a Pileup of Fraud and Waste. She previously served as the principal of Southside High School in Rockville Center School District in Long Island, New York. Prior to being a principal, she was a teacher at both the middle and high school level. So this issue of charter schools divides the Democrats. Respond to what Senator Warren said and then what you have found.
Yeah, I mean, I think Senator Warren is right on target. And it's been a shame because the advocates of charter schools misrepresent her position. They keep saying that she's trying to cut off funding. That is not anybody's position that I know of, to cut off funding for present charter schools, whether it be state funding or federal funding. But there is a real concern. It was expressed by the NAACP. It's been expressed by our organization and also by some of the leading candidates that the continued proliferation of charter schools without real reform is becoming a national problem. And the federal charter schools program has been complicit in all of this, especially under Betsy DeVos. The charter schools program has spent over $4 billion starting new charter schools all over the nation. What we found in our report was that a lot of the money goes to charter schools that don't even open, ghost schools. Hundreds of millions of dollars also go to charter schools that open and then close, some within a matter of just a few years, some longer. So the program has been very veiled. And what we are doing is we are digging deep into the data. And all of the evidence that we have shows that about $1 billion has been wasted on charter schools that have not opened or that have closed. At the same time, we see a lot of fraud. We see a lot of problems with mismanagement. We see a lot of turmoil from schools that open and then close. And we see a tremendous amount of drain of resources from our public schools and our community schools that need the funding the most. So what Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are advocating for is, and the NAACP is, hey, let's take a pause at this. Let's take a look. Our position at the Network for Public Education is let's make charter schools true public schools. Let's have boards of charter schools elected by the people instead of very often being boards that are composed of millionaires.
What is your assessment of the presidential candidates, especially here the Dems, who are divided on this issue of charter schools? Whose proposal did you like the best, or what number of them on Saturday, if any?
Yeah, well, you know, there wasn't as much spoken about as I would have liked, but we did get little hints. We certainly know that Michael Bennet is full square in favor of charter schools.
And Michael Bennett's history in education?
He was the superintendent of the Denver public schools, where he really instituted a lot of the race to the top reforms that have now been abandoned by the Democratic Party. We were very happy and surprised to hear Joe Biden talk about that he would like to see Betsy DeVos and her charter schools, as well as her policies on sexual harassment, go. That was a first. Mayor Pete says that he's against for-profit charter schools, and we find that to be very disingenuous. The only state that has for-profit charter schools is the state of Arizona. Now, many states allow for-profit management organizations to operate their charter schools. He has yet to come out and say that he's against that. That is part of Elizabeth Warren's platform, and also Bernie Sanders.
I wanted to bring Jitu Brown into this conversation. He's speaking to us from Chicago, though he was there on Saturday at the Education Presidential Forum. He's National Director of the Journey for Justice Alliance. Can you respond to what you felt was most noteworthy about this historic public forum where a number of the Democratic presidential candidates laid out their education programs, what you found inspiring and what you found lacking, Jitu?
Yes, ma'am. So first, Amy, thank you for having me. I appreciate you always being a platform for justice and a place where our voices can be heard. So thank you for the work you do and for having me this morning. The first thing I will say is the fact that it happened was a major victory. The fact that Democratic presidential hopefuls had to speak to the breadth of the education justice movement. You know, unfortunately, corporate media, in their laziness, always says that teacher unions are leading the way. But if we really know what's happening on the ground, often the tip of the spear are community groups, parent organizations, student organizations who are cutting the issue at a very grassroots level, in particular around issues of racial justice. So young people that have been fighting against assaults by school resource officers are the ones who have led the fight to put regulations in place to protect student civil rights. Community groups that have fought against the closing of our schools, have fought against the sabotage of public education, have often been the tip of the spear in saying that school closings happens in certain communities. The question of equity, as opposed to only funding, was a community-driven initiative where, and so you saw the name of the forum, Equity and Opportunity for All. So I think the breadth of the education justice movement was heard this night on Saturday, and I think that was important. So that was inspiring to me. The fact that you had, in the beginning, Karan Blair setting the tone for the event, Jonathan Jackson from SHOT, Angel Goldberg from One Pennsylvania setting the tone of the event. But then you also had Lily Garcia from the NEA, Randy Weingarten from the AFT, Derek Johnson from the NAACP, and myself frame the event for the audience, for people to understand why this moment was so important. So those things were important to me. I think, and it speaks to the growth of this emerging education justice movement across the United States. I know, as being with the Journey for Justice Alliance, that people are fighting for education justice all over the country. Young people in Camden, New Jersey organized a 1,600 student walkout to protect their teachers. Young people in Chicago, Illinois are organizing to make sure that there are more counselors in the school than police officers. Parents in Oakland, California are fighting school closings. Parents in Milwaukee, Wisconsin are organizing to win community schools. Parents and educators and community members in Chicago put the demand for 20 sustainable community schools in the teacher union's contract and won 5 years of funding for 20 sustainable community schools in the city of Chicago. I can go on all over the United States.
Let me turn to Devontae Johnson of Detroit Action for a New Economy. This is Johnson questioning Senator Bernie Sanders.
Today, I come to tell you that I never felt safe with police in my school. Since 1994, because of the crime bill, more than $1 billion have been spent on putting police into schools. So, Senator Sanders, my question to you is, are you committed to ending the school-to-prison pipeline and ensuring that Black and brown students both feel safe and welcome in their school, and if so, how?
Absolutely, I am committed, and that is one of my highest priorities. We have a criminal justice system in general, which is not only broken, but it is racist.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. We have more people in jail than any other country on earth, including China, 4 times our size. So we have a long proposal on criminal justice, but one of the aspects of it is that if you want to keep people out of jail, then you invest in education, you invest in jobs, rather than more jails and incarceration.
So that's Senator Sanders' response. G2 Brown, your response to what Senator Sanders said in the overall issue and the position of all these candidates.
So I think that the issue of equity is critical. And inequity rears its head not only in course offerings, it also rears its head in regards to how discipline is administered in school. If you view children as precious, if you view them as viable human beings, then you will treat them as such. If they struggle, you will counsel them. You will find out what their problem is, and then you'll help to alleviate it. If you view children through a racist lens, then you will look at a 5- and 6-year-old, and you'd be willing to suspend that 5- and 6-year-old. You'd be willing to police those children as opposed to understand them. And so I think that Senator Sanders has moved, as many Democrats have moved, in the right direction in regards to this question of student discipline. We know that Black children are suspended 5 times as much as their white counterparts for the same infractions. And Amy, this gets to a point. Some 65 years after the passage of Brown v. Board, we have not honored that mandate. And so the reason why we have pushed the issue of equity, because we've done everything but equity. We've done virtual schools. We've done zero tolerance policies. We've done storefront schools, storefront charter schools in the basement of churches, alternative schools, everything but facing our ugly, which is that we have a system that views Black and brown children through the lens of hate. And that's the sickness. Our children are not the problem. The problem is that racism that infects public policy. So the fact that Bernie Sanders has moved on the issue of privatization, where he was not on the right side 4 years ago. Elizabeth Warren has moved. Now Mayor Pete is attempting to adjust his platform. Speaks to the strength of our collective organizing, parents, young people, and educators working together to say that we want an education platform that is rooted in racial justice and rooted in equity. And so I think that is a sign that we are moving in the right direction. Just because we had the candidates there, that is just the beginning of the work. We're going to have to hold whoever goes into the White House accountable. But the fact that we were able to get them there and begin to move them in the right direction, because the failure to implement the mandated Brown v. Board is a bipartisan failure. I'll say one other thing. People complain about Betsy DeVos, but if there was no Arnie Duncan, there would be no Betsy DeVos. What is the difference between the two of them except vouchers? Arnie Duncan was just as unqualified as Betsy DeVos was.
That was Jitu Brown of Journey for Justice Alliance in Chicago, Caron Blair with the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools in Atlanta, Georgia, and Carol Burris, Executive Director of the Network for Public Education Action. We'll post the full interview at democracynow.org. Also on our website today, we'll be live streaming the House Rules Committee hearing on impeachment. A very happy birthday to my brother David. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.